Welcome to InfoStream, your daily current. Unsure what to listen to? Turn to us for today's headlines. Stay informed. Violence and ceasefire efforts continue in Sweida. Japanese Prime Minister heads for a crucial election. Palestinians seek aid amidst rising casualties in Gaza. The Epstein scandal implicates Trump. ICE receives significant funding for enforcement. The White House struggles to promote Trump's legislative agenda. Marco Rubio gains influence within the Trump administration. Democrats prepare to challenge Trump's redistricting efforts. Public opposition grows against Trump's immigration policies. Allegations surface regarding a Trump-Epstein encounter. Drone attacks disrupt Russian travel and cause civilian harm. Russia targets Ukrainian children with indoctrination campaigns. Ukraine seeks talks as the situation evolves. Iran expands its military capabilities. Anti-immigrant protests escalate in Poland. Cautious calm returns to Sweida amidst ongoing violence and ceasefire efforts. The situation in Sweida, Syria, remains complex and volatile despite a ceasefire announced by interim President Ahmed al-Sharaa on Saturday, following a week of intense sectarian clashes between Druze fighters and Bedouin gunmen. Supported by government forces, a cautious calm has tentatively returned, though significant challenges persist. Over 1,000 people have been killed in the conflict, with the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reporting a total of 40 fatalities, including 336 Druze fighters and 298 civilians. The clashes erupted following the abduction of a Druze merchant on the road to Damascus, escalating into a wider conflict fueled by long-standing tensions and mistrust between the communities. Government forces, deployed by al-Sharaa, initially joined forces with the Bedouin, exacerbating the violence. However, following the ceasefire announcement, some tribal fighters have withdrawn from the city, while others continue to support the Bedouin in the surrounding areas. Despite the ceasefire, sporadic violence continues, with reports of burning homes and looting by armed men. The observatory notes that government forces are attempting to enforce the truce by blocking roads leading to the province and deploying security personnel. However, the presence of armed tribal fighters remains a significant obstacle to stability. Humanitarian conditions in Sweida are dire, with residents trapped in their homes due to lack of electricity and water. Food supplies are scarce, and medical assistance is severely limited. The hospital is overwhelmed with casualties, and many bodies are being buried in mass graves. Over 87,000 people have been displaced by the fighting. The conflict involves multiple actors, including Druze fighters, Bedouin gunmen, government security forces, and various tribal groups. The United States has urged the Syrian government to prevent further atrocities and hold accountable those responsible for violence. Israel has been involved through targeted strikes against government forces, motivated by concerns for its own Druze community and demands for demilitarization. The situation is further complicated by reports of abuses against Druze civilians, including the desecration of religious sites and the execution of elderly clergy. International efforts to mediate a lasting solution are ongoing, but the deep-seated divisions and competing interests make a peaceful resolution a significant challenge. The fragile ceasefire underscores the urgent need for sustained diplomatic engagement and humanitarian assistance to stabilize the region and protect vulnerable populations. Japanese Prime Minister faces critical upper house election. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and his Liberal Democratic Party, LDP, face a pivotal upper house election on Sunday, potentially marking the end of his premiership and opening the door for a right-wing populist resurgence. The election's significance stems from the coalition's already precarious position following a defeat in last year's lower house elections, leaving them needing 50 seats in the 248-seat upper chamber to maintain a majority. Voter frustration is widespread, fueled by rising prices, particularly the doubling of rice costs, coupled with anxieties surrounding U.S. tariffs and a looming risk of recession for Japan's economy, notably impacting its massive automotive industry. Ishiba, who ascended to the leadership after a fifth unsuccessful attempt, has struggled to address these concerns effectively, leading to diminished public confidence. The election is compounded by lingering resentment over an LDP funding scandal and a lack of progress in trade negotiations with the United States, despite multiple meetings with President Donald Trump. Ishiba's insistence on demanding zero tariffs from the U.S., while potentially beneficial in the long term, has been criticized as overly maximalist. A strong showing by the Sansito Party, which advocates for Japanese first policies, including stricter immigration controls, opposition to globalism, and a re-evaluation of decarbonization and vaccine policies, is anticipated. Opinion polls suggest the Sansito could win more than 10 seats, up from the current 2, capitalizing on public discontent. The LDP's previous struggles in the upper house, notably in 2010 and 2007, resulted in brief periods of minority government. Analysts predict a potential shift in Japanese governance, with the possibility of a minority government and increased political instability. The fragmented opposition landscape, however, limits the prospects of an alternative government. The election's outcome will significantly impact Japan's trade policy, economic outlook, and the future direction of the country's leadership. The Sanseido's growing popularity, coupled with continued economic headwinds, presents a serious challenge to Ishiba and the LDP. Rising casualties as Palestinians seek aid in Gaza. A devastating escalation of violence has resulted in the deaths of at least 67 Palestinians attempting to receive humanitarian aid in northern Gaza, according to the Hamas-run Ministry of Health. The incident occurred as a United Nations World Food Program WFP convoy, comprising 25 trucks, was approaching the area after crossing from Israel and navigating checkpoints. The convoy encountered a massive crowd of desperate civilians, immediately facing gunfire, prompting the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, to respond with warning shots aimed at dispersing the immediate threat. The ministry disputes the reported death toll, asserting that the number is inflated. The situation in Gaza is rapidly deteriorating, with the ministry repeatedly warning of extreme hunger and the increasing number of individuals arriving at facilities in a state of exhaustion and imminent death due to starvation. The UN has corroborated these claims, documenting 18 deaths attributed to famine within the last 24 hours, alongside 6 additional fatalities and over 150 injuries sustained while seeking aid across Gaza. The escalating violence has primarily targeted individuals attempting to access aid, with many casualties occurring near sites managed by the US and Israel-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GHFF, which utilizes private security contractors. These incidents coincide with almost daily reports of Palestinian deaths while seeking food since late May. Furthermore, Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, overwhelmed by the influx of wounded, is directing patients to other field hospitals. A local resident described a horrific scene, stating that the entire population is dying, with children succumbing to hunger due to lack of sustenance, relying solely on water and salt. The IDF's actions, while intended to remove immediate threats, have tragically contributed to the mounting death toll and the dire humanitarian crisis unfolding within Gaza. Klobuchar attributes Epstein scandal to Trump's actions. Senator Amy Klobuchar has strongly asserted that former President Donald Trump bears direct responsibility for the unfolding revelations surrounding Jeffrey Epstein's network and crimes. Speaking on CNN, Klobuchar delivered a pointed accusation, stating unequivocally, "This is his making." Her comments followed mounting scrutiny of Trump's connections to Epstein, including reported meetings and the alleged facilitation of Epstein's illicit activities. Klobuchar's assertion centers on the reported instances of Trump's interactions with Epstein, particularly those occurring during the years leading up to Epstein's arrest on sex trafficking charges. While the precise nature of these interactions remains subject to ongoing investigation and legal proceedings, Klobuchar's framing suggests a deliberate orchestration of Epstein's activities, implicating Trump in enabling or at least overlooking potentially criminal behavior. The senator emphasized the significance of examining Trump's relationships and actions during this period, arguing that a thorough investigation is crucial to understanding the full extent of the scandal. She highlighted the potential for Trump to have shielded Epstein from scrutiny, thereby contributing to the perpetuation of the crimes. Klobuchar's statement represents a significant escalation in the criticism directed at Trump regarding the Epstein affair. It reinforces the growing pressure on the former president to address the allegations and cooperate fully with investigators. The senator's forceful language underscores the belief that Trump's actions, or lack thereof, played a pivotal role in the circumstances surrounding Epstein's network and the subsequent revelations of abuse and exploitation. The investigation continues to uncover details, and Klobuchar's perspective adds a critical layer to the ongoing narrative. ICE receives massive funding amidst increased enforcement efforts. The Trump administration is significantly expanding its immigration enforcement operations through a historic influx of $75 billion in funding for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. This substantial investment is intended to supercharge enforcement efforts nationwide, fueled by criticism from within the administration, public backlash, and a renewed focus on aggressive tactics. The funding primarily supports detention expansion, increased agent hiring, and operational capabilities. Since taking office, ICE has faced intense pressure regarding its effectiveness and approach. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem has repeatedly emphasized ICE's role and the agency's commitment to take these criminals down with even more strength. However, ICE officers report daily challenges, including tense communication with the White House and navigating significant public opposition. The funding will enable ICE to dramatically increase its detention capacity, aiming for 100,000 beds by the end of the year, including temporary structures like tents. The administration intends to utilize this expanded capacity to arrest and detain a greater number of immigrants, despite fluctuating arrest rates, currently between 1,000 and 2,000 daily. The funding also extends to bolstering ICE's reach, with plans to conduct enforcement operations in previously restricted areas, such as courthouses and farms. This has led to confrontations with law enforcement and the public, as evidenced by several incidents involving violence and arrests. The administration is actively recruiting retired ICE officers and increasing the capacity of its training academy. However, the agency's aggressive tactics have heightened tensions, with Democratic officials and community members expressing concerns about the administration's approach. Several incidents involving confrontations and arrests have occurred, further escalating the situation. The substantial funding represents a significant shift in ICE's operational strategy, prioritizing increased enforcement and detention capacity. The administration's goal is to dramatically increase the number of arrests and deportations. Despite existing challenges and growing opposition, the situation remains highly volatile, with ongoing tensions between ICE, the public, and elected officials. The White House faces a difficult sales job, promoting Trump's big, beautiful bill. Ahead of the midterms, with the Trump administration is embarking on a significant, multifaceted campaign to garner public support for its recently passed legislative package. Recognizing the considerable challenge of effectively communicating its details and addressing voter skepticism, this effort is deemed critical for Republican control of Congress in the upcoming November midterm elections. The campaign hinges on showcasing the bill's economic benefits, particularly provisions eliminating taxes on tips and overtime pay, while downplaying concerns about its broader impacts. Despite the passage of the bill just before the July 4th deadline, the administration acknowledges a lack of widespread understanding and acknowledges the significant hurdles in convincing voters. Key to the strategy is deploying top White House officials across the country to highlight the bill's perceived advantages. However, the administration is acutely aware of the negative perception surrounding the bill, particularly concerning projected cuts to Medicaid and food assistance programs, which could negatively impact a substantial portion of the electorate, especially in rural and small town areas reliant on these programs. Republican leaders are urging tailored messaging, emphasizing the bill's benefits within specific constituencies. For example, energy states are expected to focus on energy policies, while border states will highlight border security measures. The administration intends to utilize Vice President J.D. Vance in key districts to promote the bill's tax breaks and energy policies. Despite these efforts, significant doubts persist within the Republican Party regarding the speed with which the administration can shift public opinion. Recent distractions, such as the administration's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein disclosures, have further complicated the situation. The administration is also grappling with potential future legislative initiatives, including further spending cuts, which could add to the complexity of the sales job. The GOP's success will largely depend on the administration's ability to effectively communicate the bill's benefits and contain the damage caused by negative perceptions, particularly regarding the Medicaid cuts. The administration's strategy is a high-stakes endeavor, with the midterm elections serving as the ultimate referendum on the success of this ambitious legislative package. The administration's ability to successfully navigate this challenging sales job will determine the course of President Trump's final years in office. Marco Rubio's ascendancy in Trump's administration, following a late-night call with President Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte regarding Ukraine. Focusing on Russian inaction, Secretary of State Marco Rubio relayed Trump's frustration to Lavrov. Rubio's readout indicated Lavrov offered new and different ideas but no guarantees. This marked a shift in strategy, as Trump prepared to back Ukraine with potentially billions in U.S.-made weapons paid for by NATO, reversing a previous pause initiated by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Rubio's deft approach, honed during his time as a foreign policy hawk, gained him increased influence within the administration. Despite initial clashes with Elon Musk and a perceived lack of visibility, Rubio's ability to align with Trump's priorities, even when they diverged from previous stances, solidified his position. The administration's restructuring, overseen by Rubio, saw significant layoffs within the State Department, yet he maintained a strong relationship with Trump and key advisors like J.D. Vance and Susie Wiles. This dynamic was further underscored by Rubio's prioritization of Trump's agenda, including the recent military strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities. Rubio's dual role as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, alongside his operational control of the National Archives and USAID, demonstrated a remarkable level of influence. He skillfully navigated complex foreign policy challenges, including the tense G7 meeting in Canada, utilizing humor and rapport to diffuse tensions. His interactions with foreign leaders, such as the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, were particularly noteworthy, reflecting a pragmatic approach focused on achieving desired outcomes. Despite challenges, including logistical difficulties and communication breakdowns within the administration, Rubio consistently demonstrated a commitment to executing Trump's vision. The administration's restructuring, aimed at streamlining the National Security Council, reflected Trump's preference for a nimble, responsive approach. However, this shift also contributed to some operational challenges, such as the temporary pause in weapons shipments to Ukraine. Ultimately, Rubio's success stemmed from his ability to forge a strong alliance with Trump, leveraging his experience and political acumen to drive the administration's foreign policy objectives. His influence continued to grow, shaping key decisions and solidifying his position as a central figure within the Trump administration's approach to global affairs. Democrats prepare counterattack as Trump seeks Texas redistricting. The House Democrats are aggressively preparing a strategic response to President Trump's push to redraw House districts in Texas, aiming to maintain or expand their control of the House of Representatives in the upcoming 2024 midterm elections. Led by House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, the party is exploring legally risky, but potentially expensive, strategies involving map alterations in key Democratic-controlled states including California, New York, New Jersey, Minnesota, and Washington. This initiative is a direct retaliation against the Republican effort to potentially gain 5 additional House seats through Texas redistricting. The core of the Democratic strategy involves attempting to create more competitive districts by altering existing maps, a tactic mirroring past Democratic actions in states like New York. This approach is viewed as a necessary measure to combat what Democrats perceive as Republican attempts to rig the election. Republicans, including Speaker Mike Johnson and Texas GOP leaders, argue that the current maps are unconstitutional and racially gerrymandered, justifying their efforts to reshape the districts. Several Texas Republican leaders, including Rep. Pete Sessions and Rep. Troy Nehls, are advocating for a more aggressive approach, urging the White House to aim for 6 or even 7 seats. However, concerns exist within the Republican delegation regarding the potential for creating overly competitive districts that could ultimately benefit Democrats. The Democratic effort faces significant hurdles, including legal challenges and the potential for costly litigation. Some Democrats, particularly progressive voices like Rep. Greg Casar, expressed caution, citing concerns about civil rights movements and the potential for unintended consequences. Texas Republicans are set to unveil their proposed maps during a special legislative session this week, following a request from the White House. The strategy's success hinges on the party's ability to secure legislative support and navigate potential legal obstacles. The overall aim is to maintain control of the House in the 2024 elections, a critical factor given the current political landscape. The battle over redistricting is seen as a pivotal moment in the midterm race, with both parties vying for control of the legislative branch. Americans increasingly oppose Trump's immigration policies. A recent CNN poll reveals a significant shift in American public opinion regarding President Donald Trump's immigration policies, with a growing majority expressing opposition to his administration's efforts. The survey, conducted by SSRS from July 10-13 among a national sample of 1,057 U.S. adults, highlights a decline in support for key policy initiatives. Notably, 55% of Americans now believe Trump has gone too far in his deportation efforts, a 10-point increase since February. This opposition is particularly pronounced among Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents, with nearly 90% stating his policies have gone too far. Conversely, only 15% of Republican-aligned adults share this view. The poll also indicates strong opposition to proposed detention facilities capable of holding up to 100,000 undocumented immigrants, a 57% and increased funding for immigration and customs enforcement, ICE, by billions of dollars, 53%. Furthermore, 46% of Americans believe Trump's policies have made the country less safe, while 42% express concern about the government's adherence to the law in carrying out deportations. A significant finding is the erosion of support for arresting and detaining undocumented immigrants without criminal records. Despite this, 47% of Americans offer outright support for such actions, a stark contrast to the 83% approval rate for overall deportations. Despite the growing opposition, support exists for specific policy elements. 16% of those opposed to increased ICE funding also support Trump's spending bill, which includes border security, enforcement of immigration laws, and detention of those charged with entering the country illegally. Interestingly, Americans are relatively divided on threats to send U.S. citizens convicted of violent crimes to detention in a foreign country. 37% support, 39% opposed, and on efforts to revoke U.S. citizenship from naturalized citizens convicted of certain crimes, 43% to 35% support. Immigration has emerged as a top issue for Democrats, ranking second only to economic concerns. The partisan gap in prioritizing immigration has narrowed, with Republicans now 10 points less likely than Democrats to mention it. Public opinion also favors justified protests against Trump's deportation policies, a 5% to 45%, and concerns about government crackdowns on protests over concerns about protests getting out of hand, 47% to 38%. Strong backing for protests exists among Democratic-aligned adults under 35, and people of color. Finally, 59% of Americans oppose using National Guard troops in response to immigration protests, even without state governor support. Epstein's former girlfriend claims alleged sexual encounter with Trump. Recent revelations stemming from claims made by Ghislaine Maxwell's former girlfriend, Nadia Ross, have ignited renewed scrutiny surrounding alleged interactions between convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and former President Donald Trump. Ross, speaking to CNN, detailed a purported incident involving Trump at Epstein's Manhattan residence in 2001, alleging a sexual encounter occurred during a party. Ross's account, coming forward after years of silence, significantly amplifies the ongoing investigation into Epstein's network and the potential involvement of prominent figures. Ross described the atmosphere at the party as strange and intense, noting that Trump and Epstein were observed engaging in prolonged, private conversations. She specifically recounted a moment where she witnessed Trump and Epstein alone in a bedroom, suggesting a level of intimacy that fueled her subsequent concerns. While Ross admitted she didn't directly observe the alleged sexual act itself, her testimony provides a crucial, previously unavailable, piece of the puzzle. CNN's report emphasizes that Ross's account adds further weight to the already substantial evidence linking Trump to Epstein's activities. This includes previous testimony from other witnesses and the discovery of emails and other documents implicating Trump in Epstein's schemes. The timing of Ross's disclosure coincides with ongoing legal proceedings against Maxwell, where prosecutors are actively seeking to uncover additional evidence of Trump's potential knowledge and participation in Epstein's crimes. The revelation has triggered immediate reactions from legal experts and political commentators, further intensifying the debate surrounding the allegations. It underscores the complexity of the investigation and the potential for significant legal ramifications for Trump should further evidence corroborate Ross's claims. The focus now shifts to exploring the veracity of Ross's account and determining whether it can be substantiated through additional investigative efforts. Ongoing drone attacks disrupt Russian travel and cause civilian casualties. Here, recent sustained Ukrainian drone attacks have significantly disrupted air travel within Russia, particularly around Moscow, and resulted in civilian casualties. Over 230 Ukrainian drones were reportedly downed across Russia since Saturday morning, with at least 27 impacting the capital. This assault triggered the temporary closure of Moscow's 4 major airports, leading to the cancellation of over 130 flights and widespread travel disruption. The Association of Tour Operators, ATOR, reported 10 airport closures within a 24-hour period due to the ongoing attacks. The attacks extended beyond Moscow, affecting the Kaluga region, resulting in the temporary closure of Kaluga International Airport. Russian air defenses intercepted 45 drones since Saturday, while further drones were downed over regions bordering Ukraine, including Rostov and Bryansk, and over the Black Sea. Simultaneously, regional officials in Ukraine reported at least 2 fatalities resulting from Russian airstrikes in Donetsk and Sumy, alongside the death of a 78-year-old woman in Sumy due to residential building damage. Ukraine's Air Force successfully shot down 18 out of 57 Russian drones during the same period, with 7 additional drones lost after radar jamming. Multiple frontline areas, including Kharkiv and Dnipropetrovsk, were also targeted by Russian airstrikes, and the Zaporizhzhia region experienced attacks. These coordinated drone attacks represent a continuation of a pattern of Ukrainian strikes aimed at disrupting Russian military operations and infrastructure, while simultaneously causing disruption to civilian life and travel within Russia. The scale of the drone attacks and their impact on Russian aviation underscore the ongoing intensity of the conflict. Russian campaign to indoctrinate Ukrainian children across occupied territories of Ukraine, particularly in regions like Zaporizhia and Donetsk. A systematic campaign is underway to reshape the identities of Ukrainian children, primarily orchestrated by Russian state-sponsored organizations. The core strategy involves early indoctrination, utilizing tactics designed to instill pro-Russian sentiment and dismantle Ukrainian national identity. Key to this effort is the recruitment of Russian teachers, incentivized with substantial payments, $18,500 to relocate and operate within the occupied zones. The youth army, Syunarmaya, affiliated with Russia's defense ministry, plays a central role, accepting children as young as 8 and offering basic skills purportedly useful for future military service. UNARMIA has been sanctioned by both the UK and the EU for its alleged brainwashing and militarization of Ukrainian children. The campaign manifests in various ways, including nursery school activities, such as holding Russian military banners and reciting the phrase, "I am Russian." Children are also tasked with producing items like trench candles and blankets for Russian soldiers. Simultaneously, other Russian organizations, including Movement of the First Ones and Warrior, are establishing training centers focused on military and patriotic education, often incorporating Soviet-era games and competitions like the Tsarnitsa Games. These events require Ukrainian children to demonstrate knowledge of Russian statehood, military history, and firearms handling. The educational system itself is being altered, with instruction delivered in Russian using Russian textbooks that portray Ukraine negatively, framing it as a Western invention created to antagonize Russia. Teachers are mandated to conduct daily exercises, including reciting the Russian anthem. Numerous Ukrainian children have been forcibly taken to Russia for tours and have not returned. Lisa, a former student from occupied Donetsk, describes being compelled to participate in pro-Russia parades and events, highlighting the lack of choice and the coercive nature of the program. The overarching goal is to cultivate a generation of Ukrainian children aligned with Russian ideology, a disturbing tactic employed as part of Russia's ongoing war effort. Ukraine's push for talks amidst shifting dynamics. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has initiated calls for direct negotiations with Russia scheduled for next week, driven by escalating U.S. pressure on Moscow to establish a ceasefire. Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Rustem Umerov, proposed this meeting, emphasizing the urgent need to improve negotiation dynamics and secure a cessation of hostilities. Zelensky's plea centered on critical issues including prisoner exchanges, the return of abducted children, and the immediate end to civilian casualties. He asserted Ukraine's readiness to participate in a leadership-level discussion aimed at achieving genuine peace. Responding to Kiev's proposal, a source within Russia's negotiating team confirmed receipt of the invitation. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov indicated Russia's willingness to expedite a peace agreement, albeit prioritizing the fulfillment of Russia's stated objectives. President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly expressed his desire for a peaceful resolution, acknowledging the complexity and protracted nature of the process and anticipating understanding from Washington. The recent, brief cessation of talks in Istanbul, concluding in under an hour, highlights the difficulties in reaching an agreement. Russia's maximalist territorial demands previously presented as preconditions for a ceasefire remain a significant obstacle, a stance Ukraine has consistently rejected. Adding urgency to the situation is U.S. President Donald Trump's offer, a 50-day timeframe for a ceasefire, accompanied by the threat of significant tariffs on Russian goods and secondary tariffs on countries supporting Russia through oil purchases. Trump's frustration with Putin's assurances has been evident, labeling them bullshit. Despite this pressure, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov dismissed Trump's threatened tariffs as bluster, recalling past, shorter deadlines. Western analysts and Ukrainian officials predict that Trump's 50-day window is unlikely to deter Russia's anticipated summer offensive. The ongoing conflict continues to demand immediate diplomatic intervention and a resolution to the complex geopolitical landscape. The situation remains fluid, with both sides exhibiting cautious optimism and resolute positions. Iran's rearming strategy amidst stalled negotiations, amidst a stalled diplomatic process, and following a significant Israeli military operation. Iran is actively attempting to rebuild its regional influence by rearming proxy groups across the Middle East. Despite recent losses, including the death of key military figures and the disruption of Hezbollah's supply routes, Iran is prioritizing the continuation of support for these groups, viewing them as essential for deterrence and strategic leverage. The most immediate activity involves escalating pressure in the Red Sea, with healthy allies launching attacks on commercial vessels, resulting in the seizure of a massive weapons shipment destined for Yemen. This marked the largest weapons seizure in the history of the Yemeni National Resistance Forces, further demonstrating Iran's continued support for the Houthis. Simultaneously, Iran-backed groups in Iraq are destabilizing oil production in the Kurdish region through drone attacks, aiming to economically pressure the Kurdish regional government. Lebanon remains a key focus, with Hezbollah, weakened by Israeli strikes and internal pressures, attempting to regroup and maintain its influence, though facing growing demands for disarmament. Iran continues to intercept shipments of weapons bound for Hezbollah, often smuggled through Syria, where the new Syrian government actively opposes Iranian influence. Despite these efforts, U.S. President Donald Trump has signaled a lack of urgency for negotiations, following a recent Israeli attack that disrupted planned talks. Iranian officials, including Ali Larijani, downplay the importance of immediate negotiations, viewing them as a tactical maneuver. The rearming strategy appears aimed at bolstering Iran's negotiating position, demonstrating resilience and defiance despite recent setbacks. Experts believe Iran is attempting to project an image of strength, hoping to leverage its continued support for proxy groups to influence the outcome of future discussions. The ongoing instability in the Red Sea and Iraq underscores the challenges Iran faces in achieving its strategic objectives, while the U.S. remains hesitant to engage in direct talks. The interception of weapons shipments and continued attacks highlight the persistent tensions and the complex dynamics shaping the region. Anti-immigrant sentiment fuels protests across Poland. Recent weekend demonstrations across Poland reflect growing anti-immigrant sentiment, primarily spearheaded by far-right political groups and elements within the opposition Law and Justice Party. These protests, occurring in numerous towns and cities, involved varying numbers of participants, ranging from a few hundred to an estimated 3,000 individuals at the largest gathering in Katowice. The demonstrations were primarily organized by Konfederacja, a far-right political group, alongside other nationalist organizations. The core of the protests centers around concerns regarding an alleged flood of illegal migration into Poland. Prominent figures from Konfederacja and the Law and Justice Party have repeatedly voiced these anxieties, asserting the presence of a significant and uncontrolled influx of undocumented immigrants. However, these claims are contradicted by official government statistics, which do not support the assertion of a widespread or dramatic increase in illegal immigration. The scale of the demonstrations, while significant in some locations, suggests a degree of organized opposition to immigration policies. The involvement of established political parties, particularly Konfederacja and Law and Justice, elevates the issue beyond isolated incidents of protest. It indicates a concerted effort to mobilize public opinion against immigration. The contrasting viewpoints, the claims of a crisis fueled by far-right groups versus the lack of supporting data, highlight a critical point of contention within Polish political discourse. The ongoing demonstrations underscore the challenges Poland faces in managing migration flows and navigating the complex interplay between public perception and official data. The situation remains dynamic, with continued scrutiny of immigration policies and ongoing debate surrounding the extent of the perceived threat. That's all for now. Subscribe to InfoStream for your next update.